Welcome back to the Between Breaths podcast. I'm Jacko and I've got a fantastic guest for you today. We filmed it here in the Caravan of Love, aka the podcast studio. It is none other than Leon Busty. He's one half of the Lean Machines and he's one hell of an ultra running machine. You are going to be taken on a journey by Leon of his whole, I guess, career going from, in terms of fitness, starting from like boxing, him in terms of his coaching, what he's done with the Lean Machines, but how lockdown, like for a lot of us, changed the way we looked at ourselves, changed the way that we looked at exercise, and he started re-engaging with his love of running, which took him from a 50-kilometre made up event for himself from his own house to 250-kilometre events, and what he's got planned for later this year even further. I'll leave that, you can listen to the podcast to get into that. But there's one of the things that I love about Leon is the running is just a tool to learn more about ourselves or himself. And the message that I want you to try to engage with and soak up and just sort of absorb for yourself is, don't get bogged down in the fact that we're talking about predominantly running in this. Think of it and think wider than that of what is that thing for you that may or may not be running, but it may be something else. It may or may not even be exercise. It might be something else. But what is it for you that there's lessons that you can learn from yourself, but also from what Leon extrapolates out as we get towards the end of the podcast, talking about the lessons that these types of ultra running events that he's done is lessons in life that transcend way beyond a running event. So I really hope you enjoy this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to everyone that's given us a review, subscribed or followed or watches on YouTube or listens on any of your podcast platforms. Really appreciate all of your ears for listening and your eyes for watching. And if you are if you've got a few spare minutes, would absolutely love you to give us a little bit of a review, rate the podcast. It just helps with the growth of it and the spread of it, so more people can enjoy it as well. And before we dive in, just want to thank the podcast sponsors, hvmn.com. That is, you're going to get 20% off all of the Ketone IQ products, which is a supplement that I've used to help with brain health, brain focus, and actually for particularly those listening to this that are endurance athletes, it's a clean energy source, and I've used it with my own running training, building up for a new sort of ultra event that I've just recently signed up for. This is a bit of an exclusive. Signed up for on the 8th of July. I'm doing the Snowdon 24 hour, which is going up and down Snowdon as many times as you can in 24 hours. Sounds a bit crazy, a bit weird, but it's going to be fun because you've got the up and then you've got the down. A bit of a metaphor for life, maybe. But yeah, we're using the Ketone IQ for that. As part of my fueling source, not the only thing, but part of a fueling source for me that I really find helpful for those endurance training and events, but also I really enjoy it before sleep. It really helps me with, I've noticed a significant difference in the quality and depth of my sleep and recovery. So I'm very thankful to HVMN for sponsoring the podcast, and they're very kindly giving all the podcast listeners 20% off the HVMN products. If you go to hvmn.com and the code is Jacko, that gets you 20% off. So the link is in the profile. Link is in the bio or the description below. That's hvmn.com/Jacko. Jacko in capitals gets you 20% off HVMN Ketones IQ. Come highly recommended from Jacko. So that's enough of the intro. Let's get in to Leon Busty on the Between Breaths podcast. We enter this world taking our first breath, and sadly we leave this place taking our last. And what I want to do with this podcast is to explore what happens between those breaths. I'm David Jackson, Jacko, and this is the Between Breaths podcast. Leon, welcome to the Between Best podcast, and as I like to call it, the Caravan of Low.
Yeah, it's banging in here. I was welcomed with a nice warm cup of coffee, so I'm very grateful for that.
You'll be glad to know that you're the first person that's done it in. I've recorded some podcasts myself in here, as I call it, the podcast.
So I'm the first.
Studio. The first one guest. I've done some in person, but not actually in the van.
Well, look at that. Thank you very much.
Just give a bit of a rundown of who Leon Busty, for those one person that's watching that hasn't come across the magic.
So I'm a personal trainer, sports nutrition coach, and an ultra run specialist coach. Now is kind of like my major area. I've been in the fitness industry for upwards 12, 13 years. I'm pretty well known, I guess, predominantly as my duo act with my best friend and business partner John as one half of the Lean Machines. We kind of came up through the usual world in the fitness world, and then we started this weird thing called YouTube, and then the rest is history. Kind of exploded, became its thing, and now I'm an ultra athlete as well, I guess, in my spare time.
And the ultra stuff initially, I want to just talk a little bit about that, in that your journey into it and some of the watching from afar, being like, crikey,
is he all right?
One, is he all right? Like, two, like, this has gone. It feels like it sort of cranked up quite quickly,
fast.
into like a 250 kilometer.
Yes,
is that right? In the like, just for people, just try and
little
set
timeline
the scene for something. Yeah, because even someone that maybe seen some of the Lean Machine stuff, maybe seen some like. Maybe like, oh right, I'd seen more of him doing CrossFit before,
of course,
or what have you.
So if I was to do like a basic timeline of the last 12 years, first 3 years bodybuilding, bro split,
guilty,
standard stuff, all for the views, and then
all for nothing,
all for stiffness. It just looked good,
all for trying to undo all that.
Couldn't move, and then spent the next 4 to 5 years getting injured in CrossFit because of how stiff I was from the bodybuilding stuff, but loved CrossFit. Like, I still have, CrossFit will forever have, as deep as it sounds, a huge place in my heart in terms of the way that style of training, functional training, as much as that's now a coined phrase for different reasons with training, but it's fitness, it's lifting, it's skill, and I like all of those things, whether the cocktail is right in the right ways for right people, and whether, things are always done right and all the rest of it is a different argument. But I love CrossFit for that. And then I'm going to say the dreaded C word, COVID. Yeah. That changed everything. Right, okay. Because for so long, what a lot of people didn't realize with the style of training that I was doing was also my job, with the Lean Machines being filmed. We're filming everything that we're doing. So in many ways, you're kind of tied to it a little bit more than just, do I want to go to the gym today or not? It was a case of our audience and our traction and our sponsorships and relationships were so associated with us doing CrossFit, this huge identity. And then when COVID came, it was like a hard reset. For the first time in my whole career, I'd sat down, forced, I didn't really want to be, but forced to sit there and go, well, I can't hang out with John now. We're in a lockdown, can't do anything. I can only do the stuff that I've got. I've obviously got a full gym at home, but I can only do the stuff that I've got at home. What do I enjoy about my life, about my business, about my training? I evaluated everything, and it was such a cathartic process. It was really, really good for me. And what I realized through that evaluation was not just because of my job, partly as well because since I'd become a father, I'd been a dad for 2 years at that point, I'd lost all elements of ego in terms of competition. Like, stupidly read ego as the enemy a little bit too literally. And I'd been told I was way too competitive, I had too much of a big ego, and I always wanted to win, and got really. I couldn't lose at chess as much as I couldn't lose at a race that I'd been training for 10 years. Like, it was the same feeling of, ah! And that had been drummed out of me for so long that I got to this point where I was like, I don't care about anything anymore. And then I think coinciding with becoming a parent, I suddenly went, don't care anymore. Right. And I realised with COVID, it was so important in many ways to me, because it was this, I was at the brink of this place where I feel a lot of guys and girls, when they become parents as well, can kind of go the opposite way, where I suddenly just didn't care, and I could feel myself going down that route of just not caring and not wanting. So in all my wisdom, I thought, well, what can I do to find out whether I've still got what it takes to dig deep, you know?
Right, okay.
And I decided to do a 50-kilometer race, because I still had a little bit of ego about me. I'd never run a marathon, and I was like, a marathon, everyone does a marathon, I'm going to do a 50, you know, because I want it to be an ultra.
Right.
So I was like...
So 50k was the 42k is roughly a marathon, so 50k...
So 50k, so anything
was the
above...
first thing that you did?
That was the first thing. So I'd done...
What was your background? So like, when I talk about, like, I started doing some ultras, I haven't gone as crazy as you, but like, I'd played rugby for my whole life, and then had 7 years of not really actually worrying about running.
So running was...
Like, how good were you at running? You were telling me about your bowed legs that make you better.
So
how good were you at running before doing it?
So before I took it seriously, I would run... So my PB was like about 17:40 5k. So I had a fast 5k.
That's shifting. If anyone doesn't know.
And about...
That's good.
Yeah,
that is good.
That's a good 5k.
Like, I remember breaking 20 minutes for a 5k, and I thought I was
huge.
King Kong.
Yeah.
That's fast.
Yeah, so I had a fast 5k, and I had about a 39-40 minute 10k. So that was like my base, and I'd only run like one half marathon race, which was like it was a job, so I had to run it quite slow. But my half marathon, where it'd be like a recreational half marathon, was about a 1:35. So it was still a relatively bit higher than average person running. More
just so people listen, getting the concept of, like, if they're running like a 25-minute 5k.
If you're running a 25 minute,
suddenly do 50k.
Yeah, it's not going to be. It's not. I was at a higher standard baseline than your average person.
You done a lot of training your whole life.
I'd done boxing when I was younger. So in terms of like 5k, running between, back then it was like we worked in miles because my dad's old school.
Was he your coach, boxing?
Yeah, he used to be a professional boxer. So I trained...
What's his nickname? Like the boxing?
He was actually called the Tank, because he was a super middleweight. His name's Richard Busty. You'll probably be able to find him. And he was a super middleweight when that weight category...
Richard the Tank Busty.
Yeah, which was... a weight category back then. The super middle doesn't exist anymore, I believe. Right, okay. In the late 80s and early 90s, and he's about my height, so quite short. And but he's like 12 stone 9, so he was like, he just looked like a fridge. He looked like a bodybuilder, like super shredded, looked completely out of place in the boxing scene of the 80s. And doing like between 5k and 10 to 12k was the first 6 years of my training. So those distances I was fine with, and it was part of my conditioning for boxing. And then even when I got into the bodybuilding stuff, I still loved running as a way to regulate my mental health. Like, for me, movement is a good way for me to let my thoughts just flow. So I was always running, but never took it seriously. And then got into the COVID thing, and I could run. I'd get up, and for me, like, to get up and go and run for 10 to 15k was fine. But the difference was I didn't approach it from a technical aspect. There was no thought process. There was just go and run, and then be like, my knees are really sore for a couple of days.
But you do 10 to 15k started in COVID.
Yeah.
Start COVID 2020.
Yeah, I would average.
When was the 50k?
50k was June of 2021. So when we came out of COVID,
2 years ago.
Yeah, I decided to run a 50k, raise some money for Mind Charity because it felt really relevant because of the COVID side of things. And I starkly realised a few things. First of all, just how much more, I hate the word science, but the more science there was involved in just running. You know,
it can be as simple as just put your trainers on and run, like breathing, just breathe.
It's too oversimplified, which is why my fascination and passion has come from. Probably very much the same for you with breathing, is that I swiftly realised you don't just go and run.
Yeah.
And you also don't go and try and run 50k at your 10k pace, because that falls apart at 25k to 26k.
A little bit of math on that. I think it's roughly about 5 lots of 10k.
Yeah, so...
How long did it, not that time matters, but just out of curiosity, how long did that 50k take?
It was about 6.5-ish hours. I want to say at a guess. I can't even remember.
Where was it? Like was it hilly or was it?
No, it was
road,
relatively. It was road. So it was from my house. I basically just made a loop around my local city.
It wasn't an event you signed up for, right?
No,
okay, I'm with you.
because with that I wanted.
So you ran on your own?
With my friend who had his girlfriend's bike with a basket in, with my fueling strategy, of which
What's your fueling strategy?
Didn't exist.
How has your fueling strategy changed? I'll come back to it.
A lot.
We'll come back to that.
But basically, yeah, my mate just followed me, and I just went out and was like, right, this is what I'm going to do. Held my 10k pace until, we got to, I think in the first, at 2 hours, I'd got to 25k, I think it was. And I was like,
that's really good.
I'm shifting here. Got to 27k and it just felt like I've been punched in the face. They call it bonking now, where where you haven't been fueling effectively, and your stores are just gone. And then that's where it started. And then the sun came out. I got burnt, which is great, because it started with no sun. Then it got really sunny. And like I say with many things, like I learned more about myself as a person in that last 8k than I'd learned in the previous 10 years. It was that you got reduced down to the simplest form of just take another 10 steps and then reassess. Just take another 10 steps, reassess. Oh, this blister's really hurting. I need to think about something else. Let's just try and get to the next half a kilometre. So it's
funny what your brain does.
It's mental like that. It just kicks in. And I feel like if I got to that point where I was like, if I train this could be a superpower. That thing of where it just has this automatic response of, let's look at the task of what's remaining and simplify it in a way that makes sense. So I turned everything, I still do now, I turn everything into sets of work. That just works mathematically for me. So I looked at it and was like, at one point I forced myself to stop and try and force out a P, which I didn't have at that point. And we had 6k left. And I was like, I can't mentally compute 6k right now. That could have been 100 kilometers for me at that point. But what I can compute is 500 meters. So all I was going to do is go and do sets of 500 meters. We'd shuffle for 500 meters, walk. Shuffle for 500 meters and walk. Next thing I was at home, and I was changed. There was that was it. That door, you say you walk through doors in life and you never come back. And during the recovery process, which was long.
Yeah, how did, I mean, I remember first time I did a marathon, I was like, couldn't barely walk the next day.
Yeah,
but that was like on the sun, weirdly like on the Monday, it was like I had a really bad day and then I was sort of all right.
I was really messed up for about 3 days. Yeah. Like for the very next, an hour afterwards, I was, and I understand it now, and anyone who's done ultras will kind of get it as well, it was a deep pain. It was a bone pain. It wasn't DOMS. It was like, my bones hurt. Like, I was like, what have I just done to myself? And there was an element of fear.
That's it. Were you ever worried I've actually done some damage here?
I genuinely sat there in the evening and I was radiating so much heat from my knees and my ankles that I was like, I've really just hurt myself. And then the next day, it gets worse before it gets better. And was hobbling around the house going, is this pain ever going to stop? And then suddenly things just start to move a little bit and make sense. And then that fear aspect drops. And I guess in some ways, some people then return to their normal life. But for me, that's where I started to evaluate. The more I started to recover, it gave me more mental time to be able to look at it and go, was it worth it? Yeah. What did I learn? Yeah. Is there anything left for me to explore here? And I realized that I was, first of all, a little bit proud, which was great, but I was fascinated by the 8K at the end. I kept thinking about it and kept thinking about it. And I was like, I've never looked at 6K and been that intimidated in my life. And obviously there's so much context involved there, but I was like, how can you be that intimidated in that moment by a distance, and now only 48 hours later I go and shuffle across 6-8K now without even a thought. And it was that connection. And just as I was starting to figure out what I wanted to do next, I was contacted by a girl called Hannah, who works for UltraX, and they do the organised events. So they do everything from 25K.
So did she get in contact because she'd seen that you were doing and been like,
Exactly
hold on,
that.
Leon,
So because of the
might
social
like one of
media
these.
connection,
Right, okay.
you know, there's always these sort of things that happen. And she just said, I've just seen that you've done your first 50. And I was like, yeah, she's like, how was it? You know, the usual small talk and bits and pieces. And then she said, how do you feel about doing one of our events? Didn't know anything about UltraX at this point, because again, I was a novice.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, great. She's like, you can come to, she's like, you can come to Jordan with us, you can come to Sri Lanka with us, you can come to Mexico. And I'm going, fucking holiday and running, buzzing. Said yes, without realising they're 250 kilometres. So I've done a 50 kilometre.
And did you jump? You didn't jump. You jumped to 250 from 50.
Yeah.
So the first event you did
was Sri Lanka.
250.
Yeah.
So that was the first one, and then and so that was.
So if you think
So when was that?
So I did June was the 50.
Yeah.
And then
which wasn't an event. That was just one you made.
Just my own
you
one.
made with the bike.
And then
Did he bring his bike to Sri Lanka?
No, I wish he did though at times. And then in August, I spoke to Hannah and she said, do you want to do one of our races? And that was Sri Lanka was in March of 2022, so last year. Right? So at this point,
March,
I was like,
you had a bit of time to train for that, but it's a different.
And I brought a coach in. So I am obviously a coach myself in my own.
It's actually, I say
right?
this is one thing for people, like you're something I respect a lot of things about it, but something you're very open to and say and actually do, and actually it's just because you're a coach yourself, you're quite happy and seek out other coaches to help if they've got other specialists. But I don't think I think sometimes, but that's ego-wise can make us think, well, I'm the coach, so I shouldn't need a coach.
It's the same. One of the biggest mistakes I ever made as a coach, I was lucky I made it early on. I made it in the first 2 years, which was working with people outside of my remit, right? I used to I knew that I could always affect somebody's mood. No two ways about it. Every single person who came to a session with me, I was convinced I was going to make them better by the time that they left. But I made the fatal mistake of working with somebody who had a psychological condition that I couldn't manage, and I knew that there was something a lot more deeply wrong with them than what I could manage. And they had like borderline personality disorder, and in the end it blew up in my face and they threatened to sue me. It was really, really bad. They had, and basically what had happened, they'd had this, it was almost like a psychotic break, I guess, an episode where they'd been absolutely fine. We'd started the coaching. They gave me a little bit of an insight, and I had this, you know, when they say trust your gut, I had this feeling of like, I'm not sure I feel equipped here. Right. But if I just focus on their training and nutrition, I think we'll be okay here. Yeah. Had like this psychotic episode and suddenly started ringing me up, calling me all names under the sun, told me they were going to reps, like the governing body of coaching, and saying that I was this, that and the other, and went absolutely mental. And I was like, I had to get a lawyer in, and I was like, I'm going to have to go to court with this. Brought all of my conversations, brought absolutely all of our stuff to make sure that I was as covered as possible. And then radio silence. 4 weeks later, this person contacted me again and was like, I'm so sorry, I'd had a bad reaction to drugs and this, that and the other. Right. And it was a real wake-up call very early to not work outside your remit, and two, if you haven't got the answers, go and find them. Like one of the most powerful things that I've ever had with clients is when they've asked me something, if I don't know, I go, you know what, I haven't got fucking clue, but I'll go and find out because I'll know someone who does. You know, like they respect you because you're then human. And I always work in that realm as coach and client. It's a relationship. It's not me dictating from this pedestal of knowing all and being all, and you're just going to take the scraps. It's a case of we're going to work together. And I've had the best results with my clients based on that relationship. So I then just turned around and was like, right, so I'm now the client. How do I get the best results in this 250k ultra? am I going to get the best results by just getting my head down and thinking like I know all the answers when I just completely buried myself and did it completely wrong for the 50?
Yeah.
Or is there going to be other people who are well within that remit?
Right.
And I brought on Sam, who's a phenomenal coach. Then also as well, I brought on another guy, Luke, he's so knowledgeable in the nutrition world. Like, I couldn't even dream to have that much knowledge. And I brought those two together, and it was a 4-month prep, which culminated in my first event, the 250. I finished third out of 60 people.
Yeah,
and
this is the thing.
and I had no skin in the game with the ultra world. And
How long did that 250 take then?
Oh,
when you
well,
came third?
so the confusing thing with that is, I always have to add the context here. So in total, I ran 204 kilometers because we had one of our days cancelled because there was a storm, right? Our camp got flooded.
Yeah.
So we ran 4 days of the 5.
So that was,
but on the fourth day, when we got emergency evacuated to a different camp,
right.
I went out off my own back and ran shuttles up this road.
To do with the 50k?
Because because at that point we were arriving in the final camp at lunchtime, so it was going to be nearly 40 degrees. So I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do 50, because the way that it works in the events, you run at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
So you're 30k into the day before the heat comes in.
Right.
So I knew if I went out and did shuttles to do 50k, I was going to get heat stroke. It was stupid.
Right.
But I wanted 200. I'd gone out there to get 250. I'm not going home with 188.
Right.
No,
yeah.
it's not happening.
Right.
Like, there was still, that's where the ego would come in, and I was managing it in the right way for it to push me on a little bit, rather than I need to beat this person and beat that person, which is what it used to be, that dogma attitude. So we got to the camp. I went out and did kilometre out, kilometre back for 12k, so I could get.
That's like the mind. That's hard. Like,
that's resilience.
but it's bad. It's so different. Not to take us off the track, but like, just running up and down, like, mentally is just like
it's miserable,
mind-numbingly, compared to at least running a.
Well, this is the thing,
track
but like, what that was almost like a graduation for me in some ways.
Okay.
That moment where I was like, they're telling us to stay in the hotel, do nothing, scratch this day off. And everybody who reacted to it in their ways, I will never talk down to anyone. I'm there is not a single person who decided not to run. And there was a couple of people who had like a beer and hung out in the pool and that kind of stuff, because it was meant to be our finish hotel. And they were well within their rights because they were there for different reasons. But there was a handful of us that I kind of you know when you're the instigator? I was the one who said, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do some shuttles until I get enough kilometers. And it started in the end, there was about 20 people went out, did some shuffling around, and they were all so grateful that I kind of encouraged them in some ways. Yeah. But for me, it was like, I was running up and down and I was like, how far removed in 4 months of training do I get from the guy who couldn't even struggle into 500 meter intervals for the final part of a race that was the only event, it was just that day and it had to get done, to being in that situation nearly 200 kilometers into a run and deciding off my own back to turn around and go and do some unnecessary work when I still had another day of racing to do, because it mattered enough to me to get to a certain point with certain numbers. And I was at the front of that decision process rather than following somebody else's lead, and it just felt it felt amazing. Like, it was such a graduation for my mindset, where I'd seen where it had got to and it was just crumbled, and then just with a little bit of practice and time and a ton of effort, it gets to that point where you're like, I now became that person where I understand where people say it's a non-negotiable. I said that I was going to do it, so I'm going to do it. And it's not about being selfish and buggering off all of your friends and family, but it's in the moment when you said that you were going to go there and run 5 days back to back, you're going to go and run 5 days back to back.
You've done all the work, you've done all the practice. It feels, I get it.
It was important. So then finished Sri Lanka, and it was biblically hard. It was, and I never play it down, that it was not the conditions anyone expected. It was meant to be between 20, so they give you like average temperatures for the year, 24 to 30 degrees. It was an average of 38 degrees and 100% humidity every day. The worst part of the event was the fact that at night it was still plus 20. So nobody slept.
It's brutal.
So I was drinking a litre of electrolyte-rich water before I went to bed, waking up like I'd run, feeling like I'd run a marathon, drinking another litre before I'd even got on with my day. And it was the fatigue from that side of things mentally, because you know how restorative sleep is. So did that. That went great. Really enjoyed that one. But the part that I came back with was it was unfinished for me mentally, because I didn't do 250. It wasn't the
full thing.
It wasn't 250. And that was where...
Can I ask...
go for it.
Just some questions around like just the difference between those two first things, in terms of an event you just organised on your own with your mate on his bike, and actually being in an event with other people. Because I think I always find that there's a different energy around people, or me within myself, or that type of thing. And I think that's just the contrast of what that potentially like, and how you've done one day of 50k as a novice and then gone into like a multi-day thing. Or just, you know, the multi-day,
it's a different
kettle of fish, but you've been able to train for it correctly, and just how...
So I think 50k off your own back and 250k or 200k or whatever as an event, they're non-comparable. In terms of, yes, they're both running. That's probably the only thing that they have in common, in my opinion, because there was a specific reason why I chose the 50 in the way that I did, because everyone was going, well, why don't you just go and do an ultra event? I knew that at that moment I still had enough about me that if you put me on a course with a number on my top, I'm not stopping. I'm not quitting. So by doing it on my own, I was putting myself in the most bare bones situation where it was like, if I quit or I want to quit, I'm allowing myself to.
Which almost makes
because
it
nobody's watching, right? So
Yeah.
for me, it felt like a much bigger win in that scenario. So it's like, it was all catered.
Psychology is interesting.
It was all built for that reason, because I was like, I want to give myself every excuse to quit to find out how much I've got about me still, because that's what the test was. I wanted to know whether I could still dig deep, push on, find out where my point was, my breaking point. And then when it came to the event, I'd obviously trained more, and it was a lot more structured, and it made a lot more sense in the prep. But the thing that was hilarious is that I finished Sri Lanka in better condition than I finished my 50.
I was going to say, were you the training for it would be way more effective actually?
It made sense. I didn't run so fast. Slowed down to run faster, to run further, and the biggest shift was my run economy changed phenomenally. So it's something that I talk about in my run course with a lot of people. Like, the biggest mistakes people make when they've come to me is they've had shin splints, they've had impact injuries, they've had runner's knee, everyone says, they've had IT band syndrome, all these basic things, lower back pain. One of the biggest things that you can do, and it takes you 10 seconds to do it once you've warmed up to run, is check your cadence or your leg turnover speed, right? So my average run cadence was sitting between 130 and 140, and a minimum standard is around 160 steps per minute. So I was overstriding, causing so much more of like a shunting stride or impact stride on every single step. So changing my run cadence in itself, before some of like the knee drive stuff and different torso angles and bits that we did look at a little bit, that in itself, the amount of effort a run was costing my body was cut in half. So then when I finished the 250 in Sri Lanka, I came home and was expecting it to hit me like a bus after a couple of days. I felt phenomenally tired mentally, because the mental strain was harder because it's so prolonged. You're in this bubble for 5 days. But physically, the next day I was walking better, and then got onto the plane and I was getting there. It was the plane that kind of trashed me a little bit because you sat there for hours. But then one day back home, got on the assault bike, turned the legs over, got the blood flowing, and then I was looking at the next race, and I was ready to go, and then we went to the desert.
So then you said then you were looking at the next thing.
Yeah. So
was there any conversation? Because you talked about getting on the plane. Like, so when I'd done a 3-dayer last year, we drove in the camper van. I think we finished on the Sunday. They had a ferry booked on the Tuesday.
Yeah.
To go over to Europe for camper van holiday, and my sister was like, before the event, she was like, my sister's done Snowdon, Ironman. She knows how to put it in. She was like, so when are you? And we were staying at hers. She was like, when are you leaving? I was like, we're going to choose. She was like, you might not be able to drive. Like, you're probably going to be that. And like it was an interesting drive, like jumping in a car or on a plane and just both me and Kathy, my wife, our feet, like our ankles, were
swollen,
enormous.
It
was yes, it was fairly.
It was. I remember when I did my 50, the next day I couldn't physically push the clutch down in my car. It was hurting that much. So it was, when I got into my car, I went to push the clutch down. I was like, my legs are obviously a little bit tired, and had to forcefully use my hand. So I decided to go back indoors. I was like, I'm not ready.
Sensible.
Not ready. But then, the plane was rough in Sri Lanka, just because being static when you've got sore legs is not ideal.
Well, it's an interesting, like, and as I said, when you started to actually, you go on the air, but like just turn the leg, do a little bit of something, like a little bit of gentle movement, even though potentially we feel like we don't want to, how much that helps.
Mentally you don't want to, but physically you know that it's going to benefit you. And that's where, the fascination and the passion from it builds and builds and builds, because there's so many misconceptions around DOMs. Like, we've been told for years, if your legs ache, leave them alone.
I think it's a bit of a lesson in, outside of like recovering from a competition or an ultra or something like that, of just going like, if you're feeling, because you talked a bit about mental health, if you're feeling a bit crappy and I'm feeling a bit down or whatever's going on, and like you just want to stay in bed, or you just want, and actually
the worst thing you should do.
And you feel better when you actually do, but it can be difficult to get yourself. And this is the thing I like about these ultra events that I've found, is that like you put yourself in that position where you have to deal with that adversity, and you learn, as you say, you learn so much about yourself, but you learn some really like important lessons that you can. It's not, for me, it's, and I get the same sense from you, it's not about doing the thing in the right in the amount of time, or winning the race, or like, it's about what you're going to learn through that experience.
I think what a lot of people get wrong when they look at the events that I'm doing and the type of training and all that sort of stuff, and the same as when they go into an event. I put up a piece of content about this quite recently with marathons and the marathon blues, which a lot of people are suffering from at the moment. And I say to people,
what's the marathon?
So
I'm so much of a novice.
So after you've done your marathon, like when you do a big race, you've got no motivation to train. You feel a mild level of like post-race depression and stuff like that, right? Yeah. So a lot of people get that. I can see why you wouldn't, actually, to be honest, because we're a very similar mindset. But the reason people get the marathon blues is a misconception. They think that they feel down because the event's over and the marathon's done, so I now need to go and book another marathon. But what they actually miss is that when they really evaluate it was probably the first prolonged period of time that they've had in their life, in a very long time at least, in the immediate history, where they were that consistent and dedicated to something.
I was thinking, it actually helps you focus.
It's the day-to-day process. It's like I say to my clients, that don't mourn the marathon, mourn the rhythmic process that we've had in place for the last 16 weeks. So if you were somebody who was training for the marathon and you were running 4 times a week, you were suddenly setting alarms, you were suddenly deciding whether or not it was worth having a drink or not when you go out with your friends, or whether it was worth going out with your friends or not, because it equated to a difference in the outcome of your event, right? what a lot of people will really benefit from is going, well, I might not be training for the marathon, but I'm going to keep setting my alarm at 7 every day because that works for me and it gets me going. Yeah. And I might not run 4 times a week, but what I am going to do is going to reserve those 4 blocks of time each week and use them for something else productive in my life. So it's like, I think far too many people see my suffering when I do these events, because I do suffer. I might do well, but I suffer every single time. When I went out for a 30-minute run this morning at 5:30, I suffered. I hated it. It was horrible. But they see that, they don't see what you gain from it. And for me, I say to everyone all the same, I'm like, if you want to understand, you have to do. And you have to put the process, the discipline, the consistency in place for a period of time. And then you get the output and the result at the end. Yes, you'll get a medal, happy days, but you won't realize all of the other crazy stuff that you will get from the process in itself. And that's where all the magic is. Yeah. So
I can't not talk about running and ultra events and not touch on like breathing in terms of...
It's quite important.
Yeah, well, obviously you were doing it. Was there any... Let me try and rephrase it. Like, one thing I love about running is the rhythmical nature of running, and it heightens your awareness of your breathing because it's just there and it has to be there. And you intuitively, we know that, like, okay, if I can train control of my breathing, it helps me just stay in control of my rhythm and my thoughts and things like. And you know, we've had some conversations before this around like how breathing can be helpful for various different bits of performance and recovery, etc. Like, when you were doing like that 250, like, are you mouth breathing, nasal breathing, aware of it, care about it, understanding it, or not?
So
and you started mouth. When did you start mouth taping? We were talking about that.
End of last year.
Was that before that first 250? Or
no, it was after Jordan. So it was like, the 250 in Jordan was in October. I started in like November, December time.
And this is mouth taping at night.
At night.
People talk about mouth taping during exercise.
No,
I've got a video I want to make that says, if you're mouth taping during exercise, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
Because what if you want to talk? What if you want to have a drink?
Exactly that. It was not fun.
You can just choose to get, but
So the breathing side of things, one thing that I've always done, I guess to a certain degree intuitively, because of the boxing history, I always used to have to wear a gum shield.
Okay.
So when you're wearing a gum shield and you're biting down on your gum shield, you have to nasal breathe to a certain degree anyway to keep everything tight and stay in control. So I always had quite a good initial connection between nasal breathing and output. But in Sri Lanka, when it got into long runs, I was managed predominantly by heart rate to a certain degree until like day 3, day 4, when that fatigue sets in. You're like, oh, I'm doing great. My heart rate's not going up anymore, but you're just fatigued and your heart doesn't want to go up. I would always have, like, I call it like, you know, when you leave the house, you know, I got my keys, got my phone, got my wallet, that sort of stuff. I have a check-in process that I would repeat every 10 minutes.
Right, okay.
And one part of that process was, where am I breathing and can I hear it?
Okay, nice.
And if my mouth was hanging open, and I could hear my breathing, 3 really concentrated deep breaths through the nose. Simple as that. And it would bring everything back down to a nice rhythmic state again. And generally...
And that's intuitive. That's not because someone taught you.
No, it just relaxes me. It's the same as any time I'm anxious, stressed, I get... You know, I just had a phone call about my van being really expensive. The first thing I do, I get off the phone and go, it sounds simple, but as soon as I breathe in through my nose, just a couple of times, it brings me down. If I think like a 1 to 10, if I'm at a 7, it brings me to a 5. And it's the same as when I'm running. Like, if I'm having a really rough time in a run and I can feel myself spiraling, something starts to hurt, or the fueling hasn't gone right, my heart rate starts to go up a little bit too much, or I'm not hitting the zones that I want to, I just take a few deep breaths through the nose and it regulates me. So I've always used that, got that into Sri Lanka and everything like that. And
there's just on that, there's like, because some people listening might, like, we'd often, sometimes in the breathing side of things, particularly with scientifically based breathing and Oxyvantage stuff, where we get very heavy on talking about the biochemistry side of it. And like, oh, well, if he's done a big breath, is it what's happening with his CO2, etc. But I think it's a good example to go like, one, intuitively, it was something that you was aware of. Two, you had some basis of like exercising and nasal breathing from the boxing as just it was just part of it. But I think that we mentioned this earlier actually before we were recording, that when we draw air in through the nose compared to the mouth, like brain waves are different, brain states is different. But I think one of the biggest things and simplest things is that, like, you know, you have a phone call that you've got to spend this money on your van to get it fixed. It's like thoughts go all over wherever of like, can I afford it, can this, and none of those are present moment thoughts. And the focus on the breathing is just making us feel present. I think it's the 100%. Same when we're running. Like, it can be nice to let your mind wander and whatnot when we're running, but at the same time, that power of like
you have to be able to bring yourself
presence,
back.
And the breath, I think everyone can appreciate. Like, it is that thing that's like, for me, I describe it like it's inside of you.
Yeah.
So it helps you connect internally, but it's also like it's right there and then.
Yeah, I think
we were talking about ice baths. Like, it makes you go focus right.
It's
on
exactly
what's going
that,
on
and
now.
it's a constant. So you've always got, you know, when everyone thinks about their grounding tools or methods that they want to use, I always think the tool is only as good as its availability in the situation or every situation you might find yourself in. And I would like to guess, unless you're a free diver or something and you're having a shit moment at that point and you're holding your breath for like 8 minutes, most of us can always be in a situation, no matter what, if it goes to shit, we can go back to our breathing. It's as simple as that. It's always going to be a constant presence that you can refer to. So I always think a lot of practical methods that I have, which I will take into my running and stuff like that, where I'm like, I need this, need to make sure that I've got the right muscle balm that I always use. As long as I've got an extra tub of that, I'm happy, because it's going to cover me for the whole time. So it's the same as with any grounding thing. If I'm out on a run, I'm like, what can I use that's going to bring me down a little bit? I can't have a Snickers with me all the time, because it might be too hot and it might be melted. You know, I love a Snickers, but do you know what I mean? It's like, that's the way that I kind of use the breathing. So I've always been a little bit more dominant nasal than mouth, but my sleep routine was bad in terms of I was more of a mouth breather.
Well, just before going on to that, I think something that'd be helpful for people to understand from a breathing perspective, and it not purely being it's more about good breathing compared to bad breathing. And sometimes the mouth gets a bad rap and the nose gets all of the glory of what's good. The nose is an organ, it's designed for breathing and all that. But I can breathe badly through my nose,
of course,
in terms of like my mechanics can be bad. But one of the big things that people will notice and be aware of, and I think intuitively we feel it, and you've done that by trying to regulate, is the speed of the breath. Our respiratory rate, our speed of our breath, is the one thing that stress affects. It ramps up, and when the faster our breathing gets, the harder it is to stay in control of it. The harder it is for our mechanics to be good. So you're intuitively, or whatever it is, knowing to be aware of, like, okay, when you said I kind of hear it, like, that's an indicator of how fast it is, because when it's a little bit slower, it's a little bit quiet, and you're doing the one thing probably that's the simplest thing to do in terms of awareness and staying in control of, that will help performance. Stay in control of the speed of my breath. If I'm breathing too fast and I'm trying to run 250k,
it's not going to go in well.
I need to I need to try to control my breathing, but one of the things you might do is the quality, how you say, I'm going to try and breathe a bit deeper, but you almost might adjust the pace that you're running at.
Well, it's exactly
to allow
that.
You to stay in a good place.
The problem that you have in hostile environments, if you want to call it that, is, and this is what caught a lot of people in Sri Lanka, because we weren't expecting the heat. When you're 30, 40k into a 50, 60k day, and which used to be my only go-to, would be, well, if my heart rate goes too high, I'll just slow down and walk. When you're facing 38 to 40 degree heat, you can't just walk, because you're then balancing the difference between managing your heart rate where it wants to be, but your core temperature going up through the roof to the point where it could be really, really detrimental.
Well, and just it's one of those obvious things, but the slower you go during these events, it's more time, isn't it? It's fucking brutal, because you get less recovery for the next day.
So it's like, where I thought breathing was so powerful, or nasal breathing specifically for me, was that it had that regulatory effect, both psychologically, but in the data as well. I could hold the same sort of pace, focus on nasal breathing for a period of time, and I can see my BPM start to drop. My shoulders would start to relax. I would become more fluid. You know, it has a knock-on effect across everything in the chain that we're trying to work on. So it's something that wasn't costing me a ton of time or causing any more of the risk factors to rise, and it was a really simple process. So it just worked.
Nice.
It was good.
We'll come back to that. So the next one was then the desert in Jordan.
Yeah. So I'd originally planned to go to Mexico.
And part of the driver for this sounded like it was because
Unfinished business.
Unfinished
That's all I
business.
said. I literally, within a week, I was like, I'm really annoyed.
Did you have any other? Because that's what I was going to say. Me and the wife were driving after we'd done the Ring of Fire, which was a 3-day where she basically ran about 75% of it with me because I was like basically needed someone to hold my hand because I was that struggling. And the next sort of day we're laughing about how I was and blah 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 blah, and she was like, she was like, if you do something like, I am not doing that with you again. She was like, I need you to, because she knows what I'm like, she's like, I need you to remember how bad that was. Not in a week's time look back on it with a
rose-tinted glasses,
which I certainly do now. But I think we talked before we went on air. We talked about sort of mistakes we make in underestimating challenges.
Yeah.
But I think one of the difficult things is like there's nothing really to like when you're running like 200 odd kilometers. Like
it's not normal.
But it's also difficult to get a gauge of like that. You can't comprehend what it's like unless you're going to go and do it. But that would be. But then you know, like in training, I tend to think like, well, one thing I wish I'd done is I feel like if you've in training or at some point built up to doing sort of half of what you're going to try and do, your body and nervous system has got some sort of like marker in the sand of like, okay, it's like that, but like twice as bad. Well, rather than only having done maybe like, well, 50 compared to 250, but having only done a fifth of it, if my math is right.
It's not comparable.
Yeah.
So the way that I look at distances or my events, like obviously with the one that I've got coming at the moment, is probably quite relevant.
Yeah, we want to hear about that for sure.
But I won't give away the ghost too much. But what I will say is that the stage that I'm at with that is terror, right? Which is mentally, I can't comprehend what I've got to take on. I can't. I'm not there. I'm not even anywhere near close. And if you thought Jordan and Sri Lanka was long, you'll understand why.
Are you allowed to talk about it?
Yeah. So in short, I'm obviously a lot more mathematical than I thought because this is almost 5 times the distance of the 250s.
Did you have any bits? Sorry, did you have anything from like the wife say or anyone else going like, don't do anything like that again? Did you have any pushback from your endeavours? Because it does influence our loved ones.
At the end of the day,
they've got to deal with the.
My wife is wonderfully supportive.
Is she a runner at all?
She doesn't understand. She says to me all the time, she's like, you are mental. I don't get it. Doesn't mind running. 5K's her limit. Like she don't want to do any more. So I finished Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka went so well. I podiumed. Everyone's losing their mind, going, "Oh my God, this is." I
remember seeing it on social media. Like you're like, "Hey, did my first ultra,
and everyone
250 came third." Seems right.
Yeah, everyone's like, "What has just happened?" So I was like, "Well, first of all, I didn't do my full race, and second of all, I was like, that could be a fluke. I need to find out." So I switch it on his head and say to the wife, "I'm like, can I do another one?" She was like, "Of course," and she kind of saw it as, you need to get this out of your system. And
you ask permission, which is always good.
Of course, we're a team, you know.
Happy wife, happy life.
Yeah, and I'd been as respectful as I possibly could in terms of my prep for Sri Lanka, where, you know, when I got to the last block of training, you're peaking to get to around 200k in a 10-day period of time, which is the total volume that I aimed for. You can't not allow it to affect the life.
Yeah. So
and your family
give
life.
us a little. That'd be interesting for people. Interesting
So
for me.
like a normal week.
What would a week at that point look like, potentially?
So a normal week would be Monday, easy run, hour and a half.
Distances.
10 to 12k, maybe 15k, depending on the paces that we were working at.
Yeah.
Tuesday would be a 2-run day. So in the morning I'd do an hour easy. So again, another 10 to 12k.
Yeah.
In the evening it would be a specific session. So it would be tempo related, interval, maybe a hill session, which is normally between 45 minutes and an hour, where it's going to be focused work, which is all going to be essentially run training, strength training, is what we call it.
Not rather than distance.
Then on a Wednesday, I wouldn't run, I would just weightlift, so strength training specific. Thursday would
Bicep curls?
of course.
Have you ever been running and been like, I wish I didn't have so much upper body strength? Not or upper body
muscle mass.
I'm
not anymore. But when I started training for Sri Lanka, I stopped training shoulders, stopped training arms, and stopped training legs because I thought I was going to get like thigh rub and stuff like that. Because luckily,
but compared to like I've been at events where you like the guys that are at the front, like they haven't got the muscle.
Oh, they're tiny.
Yeah.
But in some ways, the thing is like I feel like what we are going to see, and we're starting to see in this hybrid space, is there is a middle ground that works quite nicely.
Yeah.
So some of my performance, my recoverability, and bounce back when things go wrong. If I twist an ankle or I turn something and something went wrong, because I got some muscle mass, it actually helped.
Yeah.
So then we do.
Thursday.
Thursday would be the same in the morning, an easy hour.
Yeah.
In the evening, it would be, if it wasn't the tempo session on the Thursday, it would be the tempo session on the Tuesday. Sorry, it would be on the Thursday, or vice versa with the hills. Then on the Friday, you do a moderate run, so it would be anywhere from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. And then
like 20k.
Yeah, 20, 25k when we're getting up there. And then on the Saturday was always long run. So in the peak phases, 4 or 5 hours.
Right.
So we're getting up to, I think my longest long run was about 55k.
Right.
So,
and that's off the back of having done a half marathon the day before.
Exactly. Yeah. So basically, what you're working
Sunday
on.
off, Sunday rest or not?
Sunday was rest until my peak week. So on peak week, it was a 10-day period of time, and I ran. I think it was like we did 4 days. No, yeah, it was 4 days. Had a break, then ran 3 days, and then it was like a really short day on the final 2 days or something like that.
So in that scenario, like Wednesday said you did some strength work. Was that the only? You weren't doing any other strength work or conditioning work around that. It was
all I was doing was preparatory and post
like
rehab stuff. So the typical little loop band, doing some clams, doing some glute bridge, single leg, isometric lunge work. Nothing that was going to cause fatigue, because that's one of the biggest balancing acts that's really hard, and it's something that I'm doing at the moment, which is you want to be strong, you want to be robust, but you don't want to be sore. Yeah. Because it affects output. Yeah. And if you're going into runs sore, it's not going to help physically and it's not going to help mentally. So it was doing enough to tick boxes, but I had to understand that I was going to lose some muscle mass, and I had to understand that I wasn't going to be as aesthetically pleasing for where I wanted to be, because suddenly doing bicep curls and side raises weren't that important when I was running. Yeah. So that's kind of what it would look like. And then, spoke to the wife and she just said, go for it. And I said, Sri Lanka was flat, about 900 meters of total elevation over the week, and I was like, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. If I want to find...
What's the worst one?
What's the worst one, basically? And it was Mexico. And it worked within our time frames and everything like that. So I decided to do Mexico, which was the start of November last year. Started training. Training looked slightly different because there was a lot more up and down hills, so we had to do more strength training. Yeah. And then 2 months out, they cancelled the event. Right. And was like, there was some sort of unrest in Mexico. There was in quite dodgy territory where the actual run was going to be taking place. So at that point, I was like, I've done 2.5 months of prep for this event, which you give a lot of time to mentally and physically. And then we were in the camper van driving over to Portugal. for a month in Portugal, which was going to be our family month, and then I was going to get back into. I was going to have a month off or holding pattern, and then get into a big peak ready. And then Carly went, "Oh, you said that they'd offered you another race, which was Jordan in the desert." She was like, "That week I've got an event before we went," so I was like, "That's it. It's the end of it. Can't do it." I wasn't going to then ask my wife to cancel her event.
Yeah.
And she then got a phone call when we were driving to Portugal, and they said that she got off the phone. She went, "I don't want to say this, but I'm going to say it." She was like, "If you want to do Jordan, that week is now free," which was in 5 weeks' time. And we were driving
Meant to be.
which was perfect in many ways, but I'd done no sand training or beach training. I'd done no like heat exposure training at all to like just get used to being at heat. And I just said that I was going to be taking a month pretty much out to be with my family in Portugal. And this then meant, this is why she said I want to say it but I don't, if I was going to be able to do it, I was then suddenly going to have to go into a peak while we're away, which then meant I was getting up we were living in a camper van. I'm getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to crack the door of the van open to go and do a 3-hour run before the girls wake up. So then we've got a holiday to have. And then it was so hard. Like that month preparing for Jordan as like a rushed event doesn't work for me mentally anyway. I'm quite anal in that sense.
Is there any regret on that of like almost ruining? Does it ruin? Does it change the dynamic of your holiday or that?
It changes the dynamic. It didn't ruin it because I was
Maybe
very.
Not the
It
right
ruined
word,
it for me mentally because I was tired all the time, and I was thinking about how to get my runs in and where I needed to run. And it was a case of we'd be in a campsite and I have to go and draw a circle on a Strava loop and try and get it to where it needs to be. And I had some really shit runs where I would get lost and the route didn't make sense and I end up in a farmer's field and all the things, all the juggling things that I can normally do were made really stressful by it just being thrown at you there and then. And I was still trying to be extremely present with my girls because we were away. So it was more the fact that I was having to pull myself away at times that didn't necessarily matter. And it was, I think in the whole month, I probably only missed 3 dinners where it was like the girls would make dinner while I was out running. So there wasn't loads of guilt. It was more just a case of, I don't like rushed preps. And it was a really, really rushed last minute decision. And it was made easier because BA changed my flights from Mexico to Jordan for like 50 quid. And I was like, all the stars start to align and you're going, oh my God, this has to happen. And then, the next thing I get back, I'm home for 4 days and then I'm flying out to Jordan to do 250k run across the Wadi Rum Desert.
And how did that go then?
5th. Out of about 140 people, I think.
Oh, here's a good question. So that you came 3rd out of 60, and then 5th out of 100.
About 140,
which is obviously very good. Congratulations, but it's not about the competition. It's about the
no. That was.
But how many people? What percentage of people finished?
Oh,
do you know at all, or as a
I would. So in Sri Lanka, we lost about 20-25 people, I think.
Yeah.
It's
typically not far off 50%. 50%.
We lost a lot.
Make the whole thing.
Jordan, I don't know, because it was such a big group, you didn't notice when people had gone. And in Jordan, they had a new rule called the drop back in rule. So they couldn't compete.
Yeah, did you have time limits? How was there stages where you had to hit certain times?
Yeah, so it was, I don't know the exact maths because it was different for each one, but I know for Sri Lanka it was 2 hours per 10 kilometers you had to cover, right? So each checkpoint is normally about 10 kilometers. So you had to be at checkpoint 1 within 2 hours. You had to be at checkpoint 2 within 4 hours. And it would be like that.
2 hours for 10k,
something like that.
You go pretty slow if you need to.
You can walk it very comfortably.
Okay.
Whereas Jordan, it was longer because it was a desert. So like on the long stage in Jordan, for instance, which was a 74k day, I was out there for about 9 hours, 9.5 hours, I think it was. I left at 5 a.m. in the morning, the second wave. The slowest wave of people left at 4 a.m. in the morning, right? I had come back, I'd had a massage, I'd had my food, I'd repacked my bag for the next day, and I'd slept for an hour and a half, and there was still people coming back in. There was some people who were out, the real troopers of Ultra.
Yeah, I know.
Are the ones who were there all day.
This was us I came in third from last on the Ring of Fire,
Yeah,
and it was like speaking to some of the people at the front. They're like,
Yeah.
I don't know how brutal it is to like be that slow. They're like, being that slow.
Yeah, it's
is worse.
so long.
But when you're like, I'm like, I can't go any faster.
No, it's exactly that. And that's where
you were at the front. You were the.
Yeah, well, like I was.
Good on you.
So the way it was with Jordan is that I was always out in everyone's got their packs, right? So there was a pack of around 10 of us that pulled away quite quickly. Within like by the time I got to the first checkpoint, I knew who was in front of me, and I had a good idea who was around me.
Was there any point of like knowing that you're quite at the front, being like, hold on a minute, am I going a bit too fast or?
Oh, constant paranoia, because the top 4 people were utter savages. They were
must have been
unbelievable.
You must have been I
was the most novice
out
of the from. I think there was one. I think the thing is that we made it quite confusing is that a lot of people in the 250 realm, that might be their first 250, but they're incredible ultra athletes.
Yeah.
So their transition is slightly different.
Yeah.
So you had the top 3 guys were. They were animals. Like in my mind, I idolized them. They were so strong.
What were their biceps like?
Tiny. So I only had that on them. And then there was a girl who was fourth. She came in ahead of me as well, and I called her the tank. She was this tiny little Swedish girl that just shuffled all day. She didn't walk a hill. She didn't run a hill.
Just everything.
She just shuffled. It was literally, she barely picked her knees up, just like this, all day like a metronome. And she just didn't stop. And there was a moment on one of the days where I went past her, I was like, finally, I fucking got her. She keep beating me every day. It was on the long day, got to like 55, 60K and I'm in a hole. This is really hard now. Suddenly I hear, if that's her, she shuffles past me. Hour later, I can't see her, she's gone. And that's like, it was beautiful to watch.
Yeah.
She was just built for ultra.
Have you seen, have you heard of the Dragon's Back? The one in
Yeah.
Have you seen the BBC documentary on that? Oh, I need to watch that. It's good. There's a lady that I think comes third overall. Like,
Yeah.
And she's just like that, quite like stocky.
Yeah.
I can't remember her name, and just destroys it. But the whole always, hey
Yeah, for sure.
Like never once looked at, literally just run like 6 days of running, however far the thing
That's what
is.
this girl was like. Like she barely spoke a word of English as well, so she was
But
quite
happy,
quiet.
like,
Yeah, it's all right. She could be out for a
I'm
walk,
not-
just going to get her groceries and like exactly that. So yeah, Jordan went very well in that sense. But the only thing that I was chasing in Jordan was completion, first and foremost. And then there's, you get different ribbon colours, right? So you get like a standard ribbon for finishing, and then there's a white ribbon if you finish the whole event in sub 30 hours. So over the 5 days, you do it in sub 30 hours, you get a white ribbon. And then if you finish it in sub 27 hours, you get a black ribbon. And I get to the end of the day 4, and one of the guys comes over to me, the team, and goes, Leon, it's like, if you run tomorrow fast, you'll get a white ribbon. And I was like, great, I'm obviously going to go for the white ribbon. And it was a marathon basically, 42, 43, free.
Right, okay.
I think it was 43.6K, I want to say.
Yeah.
And I had 4.5 hours to do it in the desert. So I was like, it's shifting for a marathon.
No,
At the end of that. And I came in at 4 hours 11, I think it was.
Nice.
And it was one of the fastest days, average pace that I'd had for the whole event.
Right.
So the performance went really, really well. And just to put it into context, everyone ahead of me got black ribbons.
Wow.
That's how incredible they were.
Yeah.
That means that they were at least 2 hours faster than me overall, which is a lot in one day. Over 5 days, it's about an average of about 30 to 40 minutes per day.
Yeah.
And when I finished Jordan, what I had the realization of is the difference between being quite a natural runner and quite anal about the prep where I could get to, which is where I was. To bridge that gap from that to a black ribbon performance I can't do that as a family.
Yeah.
I wouldn't justify it personally. Like I could have done.
But equally, what would it mean?
It would mean a 6-7 month prep with, if I was to do Jordan next year.
So I mean more like
Specific training.
no, not specific training. As in you've got it, you've achieved it. Like what would it mean? It'd mean like
Yeah.
it's not going to change it.
It didn't. There's this weird thing when you do things with what you gain from it versus what you put in. It's the same reason like when I quit boxing because the feeling of winning didn't feel as good as being punched in the face 4 times a week for training, and the training was so brutal.
Yeah.
And when I finished Jordan, I was broken. Like it was so hard. My feet looked like they'd been 2 smashed pies. I lost 3 nails, 2 of which were hanging off from the end of day 1. Yeah. And then you go and run another 200k on feet like that.
Nice.
And I had so much disconnection from my girls that emotionally I was a wreck. And I just looked at it and was like, I don't want that enough to give up the amount of sacrifice that it takes to get to it. So I do that.
Yeah. Well, because you said at the very beginning, like the first 50k at the beginning of lockdown was like the reason for it was I want to see whether I've still got that
Exactly
I feel like almost like society's told me I shouldn't be competitive. I want to see if I've still got that.
It felt like Jordan answered that.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, I think, yeah.
And I came back and I rang my wife from the hotel in Jordan and she was like, so where are we? I was like, I'm done. And I was 100% done. I was like,
I don't need
to do anymore.
Okay.
If I want to, it's a different thing. I was like, but I don't feel the need to do another 250. Maybe it's because I know that I don't want to just be, if I'm doing it, I'm too competitive to be just within touching distance of the podium, but not getting it. And I don't want to put up the amount of sacrifice that it takes to potentially fight for a spot. And I felt like, I've done the 250. I'm really happy. I'm really proud of myself. It's been a great year. 8 months of constant training is a lot for 2 weeks of work.
Yeah. And I think like a nice concept, like a rugby example, like Johnny Wilkinson. Most people have heard of Johnny Wilkinson winning the World Cup in 2003, and he's that was like the pinnacle of everything that he was playing his whole career for. And I think it's in his book, I've certainly heard him talking about it, saying that almost within seconds of the final whistle going, he was like, oh, it's over. Like I've done it. It's like, and just having that realize, and that doesn't have to be like that doesn't have to be like it's not a bad thing.
It's
but
not.
Just a realization of going like, okay, it just puts things in context. Going like, okay, like whether you came first, second, or third, or fifth, or third, like that's not the thing. Like
no.
The thing is the experience and what we learn from it.
It's exactly that. And I feel like when I came back from Jordan, the biggest thing that I felt was contentment. And that was something that I probably hadn't felt in that area of my life for so long. And I felt confident, I felt proud, and I felt competent more than anything. That I was like, mentally and physically, I'm in the place where I want to be, and it makes me, and I feel good with that. Everyone's got their balance.
Yeah.
And then the most peculiar thing happened, which I still don't understand why. I kind of understand how, I guess, to a certain degree, but so the process post-run is you come home and you go into some form of recovery. So some easy runs, some really high calorie meals and that sort of stuff. And I start doing easy 30 minutes on the treadmill just to keep my legs ticking over the following week. And this nagging feeling of, you need to run the length of the country. Run the length of the country. Run the length of England. Run the length of Great Britain.
So what do you, is there any, have you got any...
The only thing that I can think of at the time is Ned Brockman was running the width of Australia, right? And I was following his story and I was like, this is amazing. I have a friend...
I interviewed Will Burnett, who did the same thing last year.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, from west to east coast.
Sick.
It's like, what was it, 8,000 kilometers or something? I can't remember what
Yeah, it's savage. So I was watching Ned's stuff and I was like, this is amazing. He was moving a nation.
Yeah, I've heard him being interviewed on a podcast. Like,
Yeah,
insane guy, like incredible,
absolute savage. And I was just really enjoying his energy at that time. And then I obviously had a friend of mine as well, Will Goose, who'd done 48 marathons in 30 days, and when you start immersing yourself and being around people who are doing these things and they make them feel normal, I feel like you open yourself up to that thought, whether you like it or not. You know, I'd done a couple of 250s, I had a bit of skin in the game, and I was like, well, it didn't feel intimidating. It just felt like it could be like, maybe go and do Murph the other day, tomorrow, which is what CrossFit feelings used to be like. It just elevated. So the idea of me running the length of the country was terrifying, but it wasn't like not in a million years. It just kept flowing.
Equally, like, probably signing up to like a 500k would not probably be that motivating, because you're like, you know that you could do it.
Well, this is the thing. It's like, if you give yourself enough time and you train in the right way, the steps have to make sense. So it was like, I didn't want to do a 500k, or I didn't want to run faster, because everyone was saying go and do a
250 and do it faster.
Yeah, it's like everyone go and do a sub 3 hour marathon. I'm like, why? I don't have any desire to run a sub 3 hour marathon.
Same thing. First marathon, it was like, I don't want to do another one. I don't want to try and go faster for whatever reason. It was like, just didn't motivate at all. But but to run another marathon after this one, like, that's sort of like mind blowing.
You just kind of get pulled in the direction that I feel like, in some ways, without sounding too deep, the universe is going to pull you in directions. You do things and it opens up doors. You choose to walk through the next one, whichever door it may well be. But I became a lot more connected with how I was feeling and what was coming in and what was coming out.
That's cool.
And it was probably about 3 weeks before I filmed a clip on my phone that I'm so glad I filmed. I filmed got to the end of the...
Once you put it out there, it's sort of like...
Yeah, and I didn't put it out publicly.
You've got to do it.
But on the 11th, I think it was 11th or 14th of November, I finished an easy run, and I just filmed a 2-camera piece on my phone saying, I've just finished an easy run, and I think I want to run the length of Great Britain, and I think I want to do it in 14 days, right? And I made that for reference for when it was going to happen.
Okay.
Because the thing is, it's like with big events, there is still a little bit of like ownership from some people. They're like, oh, you can't do it if I'm doing it this year, and you can.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It's like I still felt like I needed to own that idea if I was going to take the responsibility enough to go and put it out there. So I was like, it's there. Put it to one side, parked it, didn't think about it again for about 5 minutes, and then
your wife rang you. Hold on, what are we doing?
And then I said to my wife, I was like, I'd like to do that one day, and I'd like to do it for a charity, because I'd not done any charitable stuff since the 50k. It felt quite stressful. And I was like, I want to do something that the stuff that I'd been doing has motivated people, and it made me feel really good. I was like, I'm just doing me, and people are coming towards me through me doing me. And I was like,
that's cool.
There's
nothing better than that.
There's no. It's like you spend your whole time as a coach trying to move people with words or with movements or with ideas, and then suddenly I was in this space where I was just over here doing my thing, and people were coming towards me.
That's the thing that resonated most with me when you know my story of like rugby, but then like heavily into calisthenics, and then being like, and that identity thing of being like, actually I want to go running, but that's not calisthenics.
Exactly that.
And then see, I remember seeing one of your videos on Insta, and it was like that notion of like just exactly what you say there, just you being you, helps liberate other people, give people
100%.
permission to like do the same thing, and it's like
and that was so powerful. So then I just tried to keep the
Isn't it freeing though for yourself? Sorry, like freeing for yourself, and then being like, oh, actually, when I'm just doing me. It's that
there's
thing.
No
pressure of that though.
Yeah,
you know
it's
I mean?
like that passion purpose thing. You know, you meet so many people who kind of are fortunate enough to be doing a job that earns them money, pays the bills, but they enjoy it at the same time, and they would probably be doing it whether they got paid or not.
Yeah.
And like for me, the same with the runs. Like at the moment, I haven't spoken about this too much publicly, but when I first decided that I was going to do Joggle, the length of the country run, I fully committed to paying for the whole thing myself. Like financially, it's probably about 25, 30 grand to be able to do something like that. The amount of logistics involved. And I said, I was like, I want it sponsored. Christ, I want it sponsored. But at the end of the day, if I don't, I'm going to do it regardless.
Yeah.
And that was a conversation me and the wife had where she just said, you can do it. You can go for it. I know she knows we've been together 12 years. She knows that if I'm saying it to her, it's already in there and it's going to annoy me and it's going to annoy her and she's not going to hear anything else until it happens. So we spoke about it in Costa Rica, and then I just found this 2-week window in this year where it can fit, which is the 23rd of July until the 6th of August. That's it.
I was going to say, we'll drum up some support. I want to try and
match up somewhere.
I'm going to be coming from. Should be in North Wales by then, maybe. So somewhere around. I don't know. I need to look at the route where you come
for
through.
sure. But yeah, there was only a 2-week window, realistically, where I could make it fit. There was another 2-week window, but it was the week that my daughter starts school, because she starts school this year, and I was like, "There's no way you can do that."
So this is this is school holidays, isn't it? Is that right?
So because she starts in September. So September was a month that originally I was like, "That's perfect. It gives me long enough to prep as well." I say long enough, but in the end, we shuffled it forward to July, which wrongly or rightly is just the way that it is.
And we're recording this now on the 11th of May.
Yeah.
So you've got
10 weeks.
And how is training going? Just in a nutshell, how is training going and how is...
So, decided I was running in July. In December was when the wife was like, right, we're all in, let's do it. I've got your back, happy days, I'll support you.
Yeah.
January, started doing some basic foundation work and spoke to my coach and said we'll start end of February, proper prep. Second week of February, I think it was, because I got back from Costa Rica in the second week of January. So give me a month to find my feet, get my business all in line, blah, blah, blah. Grade 3 ruptured my MCL, grade 2 tore my LCL in February, end of February.
That's not good prep.
That's not good prep in jiu-jitsu. Then went on an aggressive rehab protocol from last week of February, and I had to be by my team safely and effectively because I still needed time to prep. I had to be running by the second week of April. I completed a marathon in the first week of April. Then
in a training marathon
without prep.
Yeah.
So I was doing it in support of somebody else's charity event.
All right. So I went, actually at an event.
Yeah. So I went.
Nice.
Josh Peterson, who's doing the 76 marathons, he came to Norwich as one of his cities.
Right.
I'd been running for like 2 weeks, doing 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there, just getting feedback from what the MCL was saying. It seemed to be doing okay. Then went out with the idea of time on my feet, see how I get on. We crossed the marathon. Was really happy. The following week, I ran a 75k trail race, which was the furthest unbroken distance I've ever run, which was crazy when you think about the 250s, but 74.6 was Jordan's long day, so it was 0.4 shorter than my PB. So that gave me the mental tick of I'm not rehabbing anymore.
Right.
It's not broken. You know, there's a mental...
incredible, recovery.
The recovery's
period.
been phenomenal.
Fair play to you. You've done your homework.
Yeah, we had to work hard for it, but the fact is I was already locked in for July.
Yeah.
And I just look at it a lot of the time. I'm like, it's a test. This is the biggest test that I'm asking for in many ways and putting myself out there for. And if you want it enough, you don't get it for free. And I feel like it's many things. Life in the universe works like that. It's like, if you want it, you got to prove it sometimes. And sometimes you prove it by just sheer grit and determination and effort. And sometimes you're going to get barriers. And I've had a couple of barriers with this one where I would have been well within my rights to go, all right, I get it, I'm done.
Yeah.
But even now, it's easy for me to say now, but if I don't complete this run, say for whatever reason I don't even end up on the day one, there's another lockdown, who knows?
Yeah.
I have already grown phenomenally, or more so in this process already than I expected to through the whole event. Through being constantly told no by companies when you're asking for money and support, and in my world of social media, it's always people coming to you trying to throw money at you to do something. So being on the other end of it and having to build an event is phenomenally humbling to get used to no's, yeses, maybes, how to sell your idea more effectively, run a business and create an event, how to work day to day running two businesses, trying to create an event, trying to raise money for a charity whilst trying to raise money for a company, whilst trying to be a husband and a family member, and all these kind of different things going on. And then you chuck the injury in there, and I'm like, cool, it's another opportunity to say, can I? And I now look at it and I'm like, how cool is that story? You know, you get to the end of it, this documentary will come out and it will start with an MRI scan, you know, and it's like, this is what you can do if you look at things as an opportunity rather than an excuse to get out. You know,
things don't have to be perfect.
They don't have to be. It's far too often that people will get an injury in life and they will indulge in that feeling of what's been taken away from them rather than what they can learn from. And my recovery process now is 5,000,000% better through indulging in that injury in a positive way, going, how can I improve blood flow to that area? How can I make that knee more stable? How can I make it more robust while still building and trying not for this side to compensate so hard? And it teaches you to learn, and my knowledge level has gone up exponentially and from a situation that would be seen as a negative situation. And yes, I'm going to turn up less prepped physically than I want to, but then I feel like I'm going to get that, I know I'm going to get the moment where I fundamentally realize that I am not as physically prepped as I would like to be.
But you're probably more mentally resilient from dealing with the injury.
But we'll get there, and I'll arrive at that moment, and there will be this weird smile that will come across my face, and I'll be like, right, this is the lesson that I now get to receive and go through, because I'm not as prepped as what I would. And if I'd been able to prep in the way that I wanted to, I would miss that lesson. You know, so
I want to ask and give you. I'm going to tee it up for you, but to finish with, what's the biggest lesson that's for life that you feel you've gained out of doing ultra style events? But before you answer the question, just to plant that seed, that's what we'll finish on.
Okay.
With the so we lose some anticipation, but with the it's quite a big question, so I thought I'd give you a bit of space for it.
Yeah, cool.
With I reached out when because I'd seen you announce the Land's End John O'Groats run, then seen you do your knee, and I was like, those two things don't work out.
They don't work.
That doesn't, and then could see you literally I remember you I don't know, you posted a video that was like after, I don't know if it was like the next day or whatever it was, and you were getting on with your rehab, and I was like, okay, he's going at it still because he's got to try it. So I was like, so I reached out and said, look, there's we did a little session on breath holding where it's like you can maintain some conditioning in terms of how your body utilises oxygen and deals with carbon dioxide that you would potentially lose during that rehab period where you can't go and push the body with some breath holding. So we did a little session and fair play to you, you've took some of that and integrated it into some of your stuff. We're just interested for people. That was brand new. Remember that session? It was fairly new, and it was fairly whoa,
terrifying.
What's going on here?
Absolutely terrifying.
But just for people that are, what was your experience of that sort of session and that dose of CO2 that just went, woof, hold on a minute, what's going on here? And
the knock-on effect.
How you then, we talked about some of the walking breath holds that you've done.
So that session was as humbling, if not more humbling, than my first 200k when I did the Sri Lanka one, the 250. Because when you reached out and we'd had a conversation, I was scratching at the box.
You'd been taping your mouth and you'd come across
I tried taping,
at
but
night.
But the thing is like the taping at the mouth comes down to a few practical elements. You're laid next to your partner. When do you put the tape on? What kind of tape am I using?
You get very good at communicating in.
So it was like there was a few practical issues that were causing me to not be consistent with it, right? So then I can't remember, but I listened to a podcast, I believe, which had someone on talking about that sort of stuff. And I'd used the Wim Hof stuff because I used the ice baths and everything. I was like, there's too much, when there's like too much noise around a subject for you to avoid it. And I'm like, there's got to be something in this that I need to explore because I thought it would be beneficial, obviously. So it's James Nestor book, Breathe.
Yeah.
I always get it wrong.
Breath.
Breath. I always get it wrong with the E. Dyslexic mind.
I can't remember if it's got an E on the end of it. It's the worst. Breathing is the worst thing to be involved in if you're dyslexic.
Yeah, mate, it's stupid.
The E's, diagram.
Yeah, but basically, I listened to his book and it blew my mind. Like, utterly blew my mind. And I was like, I'm in now.
Yeah, it's one of those things, you can't put it down.
It's not.
As in, you can put the book down, but you can't take that out of... You've learned something, you cannot unhear.
That's it. There's a thought process that came into my being that was so consciously on the surface because you breathe every single day multiple times that I was... Because I had it as an audio book and I bought it as a hard book or a softback as a physical cue, right? And I put that in my bedroom, which sounds really strange, but...
Put it there and then so that you.
So I would see it and go, to breathe.
I thought you meant see it so then you'd listen to it.
No, so I listened to the book and it was so eye-opening to me that I was like, you have these books where you listen to them and you're like, you don't want to forget the information that's in there. And with that book in itself, having a physical cue reminded me to nasal breathe. So I put it in the bedroom. So every single time I get up in the morning, I walk past it at eye line. Straight away, I'm like, remember.
Is it still there now?
Still there. And it will be there until the end of time. And I'll probably never read the book again. But it opened something up and it was like a thread. And then we had the session. And how phenomenal and terrible I felt at the same time from that one session, considering, it was a workout from in a very, very low state.
Yeah, so in essence, for people like knee was, you were early stage of rehab. It was like you could turn the legs on a bike, but you couldn't work. I don't know,
elevate heart rate massively.
It wasn't much. Yeah. So we couldn't do the work. So what we did was hold the breath after a normal exhale, so that the body was going to be starting to get a little bit starved of oxygen, like it would if you were working hard, and accumulate more CO2, like you're working really hard.
Yeah. So we did that, and that was.
It was probably a little bit unfair of me in that just of like, I'm like, it's Leon, he knows what he's doing.
Right.
He's done some hard things. He can take a bit of it. Like, I gave you, we went quite hard quite early. I probably I didn't really tell you. But it was like, I wouldn't normally, that wouldn't be less than one for someone else. But I was like, right, we'll just
There's got a bit of skin in the game.
Straight in.
Yeah, and it was savage. But not savage like I'm laying there panting like a dog. I've just done Fran, in a CrossFit family would be like, oh yeah, I get it, it's Fran. But it was so hard, so hard to do something so simple. So coming away from that, going into some very simple, practical day-to-day things of trying to do breath holds while walking. I tape my mouth. I got actual proper tape now where I tape every single night. And this tape was just like the M3 surgical, 3M, from Boots. And it's...
Other outlets are available.
They are, yeah. But the thing is like, I feel like certain things for everybody comes into their life at certain points for the right reasons, right? And like there'll be people who will listen to this podcast and listen to me talking about doing ultras and going, nah, he's messed up, not in a million years. But they could come back to this in 4 years' time and go, I'm ready now, I'm going to listen to that episode. And I feel like the breathing for me came in and out, and then when it came then was a moment where I feel like I needed it, and it was probably because I was incapacitated physically. I needed something else to grip to that was still going to be able to help me and be practical.
Some of the
Everything
professional
is
athletes I
timing.
work with, where it's like injury is a great opportunity, because one of the bad things about injury, like psychologically being injured is difficult, rehab is difficult. I was talking to a female, England, plays for England rugby, and like during, she was like, oh, I haven't had much she was actually doing the certification with me, the Ultraman, and she was they'd had their big game at the weekend, and she was like, during camp whilst I'm there, it was like, I've been doing some rehab, so like when you're doing rehab you get no days off in that type of environment, because there's all the stuff going on normally, then you've got to do all your rehab stuff as well.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
there's an element when we're injured where you can't do what you normally do. Mentally that can be quite hard, and also like sometimes, I mean, I did it with the sort of brain injury things where it really stops you doing anything at all because you just can't function.
Sure.
Being given something that I can do, like a breathing exercise, at least I can do that. It's just giving me something that I feel is going to help. Is mentally really helpful as well.
I think, to be honest, the biggest thing that we're all fighting for, whether it be injury, work-life progression, having the life that we want, and being in a spot where we feel comfortable or connected, I guess, is control. And control, I always say that everything, the way that I coach, the way that I live, is controlling the controllable factors. Life will happen, things will happen, but you have to distinguish what it is about what's just happened that you can control and what isn't yours. And a lot of the time when it comes to injuries, people think if they force it enough and they get annoyed enough and they try hard enough focusing on this injury, that it will get better. But most of the time, with like my diagnosis with my MCL was, it could be 6 weeks, it could be 6 months, it could be a year and a half. You could potentially, you know, there was a conversation that I might not ever be able to go back and do jiu-jitsu again because of the external rotation and the downward pressure of people trying to get past knee shields and stuff like that. So I sat there and was like, I could sit here and spiral and worry about all of that, or I can go, right, do everything that I possibly can, divert my energy and frustration into all of the things that I can do and do them as best as I possibly could. And that's where your breathing work came in. And now I tape every single night. I focus on less is more, breathing through the nose, and it's helped my jiu-jitsu conditioning. It's helped my mental health 100% through that injury rehab process, and now it's massively helping my running as well. And it's been epic. And this is just the start.
Well, let's just finish with, I think, and because I feel like you're gonna have something for us that.
Here we go.
But just for the conversations that we've had before this, during this, that there's a depth to the conversation and a depth to you that I love, and that the run or any of the things you've done has not been about trying to win it all the time or the whatever. It's part of the thing, but it's like there's more to it, and
there is 100%.
Is there anything that you could highlight for us that is beneficial for either your life or potentially everyone's life that you've learnt through
adversity?
Those challenges, because you don't have to do any of those running things, but we choose to do those things, and sometimes it's difficult to know exactly why it is where we choose to do them. But
do you know what? I think there's two major things that maybe people don't feel the same as me. You know, I'm different to many people in some ways, and everyone's their own, I say, individual butterfly. But in a world, first of all, in a world that feels riddled with a lack of choice, it's really quite freeing when you make a decision and you get to choose to do something, and something's not chosen for you, right? Because at the end of the day, life fundamentally comes down to two things: choose or it's chosen for you. And I feel like the more times you choose to do something, whether it be good, bad or ugly, it's going to have a net positive effect in your life, more so than, like, it's the same as an example when you look at it with your friendship circles. If you're the person who's always making the plans, you're going to get annoyed because you're the planner. but you're gonna do stuff that's fun and you enjoy it at the end of the day because you're getting to choose it.
Yeah.
But if you're just sat there being pulled left, right, and centre from all of your friends doing all the stuff that they want to do, it's great. You're just there, but you're constantly getting your cup emptied and going, well, what do I get from this?
Yeah.
And I feel like life is very simple in that kind of sense. That sometimes I think you should choose things that aren't always easy and definable because it teaches you more about yourself.
Yeah.
And then on the second element, I think the biggest thing that it's removed, which is really scary but really liberating, is the limit. The preconceived limit that we all have is set in so many different layers, in so many different ways. Everybody, again, is completely individual, but we all have this rooftop of what we believe our abilities are. And for some people...
I could never do that.
Exactly, right?
You know, hold on, you might, I don't know, you actually might be able to.
And this is where it's scary, is that just through this last 2-year block of my life, I see every element of my life, the way that I run my business, the risks I take day to day in good ways that have been positive, the way in which that I approach my training, my parenthood, my relationship, everything has been changed fundamentally, because now I don't see a limit to my capacity in those areas in life. And it's not a case of I'm trying to build $1 million business or anything like that. I don't have value for financial success. You need money, money flows. It's just one of those things that we have to understand. But I will now make decisions based on, do I want to do it or do I not? Do I need to do it or do I not? Is now a very different situation, whereas everything used to feel very pressured and very, well, I need to get to this point and that's it, then I'm going to be comfortable. And I've just suddenly, it's a bit like we're in the Truman Show and someone's just opened the backstage door and gone, but there's all this out there, it's now just up to you to decide whether you want it or you want to do it or you want to head towards it or not. And I think once you walk through that door of the limiting, whether it be limiting beliefs, the limiting associations you have around you, or you do enough things that galvanize your mind and build enough belief, I guess, or build enough evidence that you can do more, then it's terrifying. Like, I wake up every single day and there's a guy running the length of Africa at the moment, and I'm like, yeah, he's called like the hardest geezer or something. He's a really funny ginger lad who's running from South to North America. And the areas of which, the way that I feel now, which is scary, is I look at that and I respect him greatly, but I'm not scared by the prospect of that. I wouldn't want to do it personally myself, but I don't go, I couldn't. I just look at it and go, I don't think I'd want to do that. It's when your mind gets unlocked to this level, it's a case of, I am going to get humbled, I am going to get hurt, I am going to get brought down to my level at some point with these things, but
it gets us in a
you just get, you get into this point where the blinkers come off and you suddenly go, nothing's a no, it's just a case of if it matters enough, you know, and that's both exciting and scary.
Yeah, I love that notion of like, choose or make a choice or be chosen for you, because it feels like almost different words for the same thing, of like that difference between, are you really living or are you just existing?
Yeah.
We talked about that before we ran out, and I think that resonates deeply with me.
I think so. I think what people don't understand is that life happens consistently around them whether they like it or not, right? If you go to bed,
the beauty of life.
It's always going to come, and it's either going to be good, bad, or ugly. And the thing that a lot of people don't understand or don't grip is that it's a choice for it to be good, bad, or ugly in its simplest sense. Because you can wake up with a positive mindset and go, I'm going to take control of today. I'm going to do something that puts me in a positive frame of mind. Or you can get up, moan, hate the fact that your alarm's gone off, lay there and snooze it, watch a shit ton of social media instead of getting on with your day, and you can put yourself in a negative frame of mind.
And what I love about that whole thing of like life happening, whether you choose A or B,
it's still happening.
It's still happening, and tomorrow is still going to come.
It's exactly that. Yeah. And it's they're probably the two biggest things that I've learnt thus far. If you ask me again, on the 7th of August. It'll be something different, I'm sure.
Well, no, I want to tell people where they can find you, where we can follow what's going on.
So
where can I find the route so I can try and figure out?
Yeah,
which
so
day
I
can
will
run
give
with
you the route specifically. But the Monday the 26th of July we'll be starting up in John O'Groats, and we'll be, all things being well, 14 days later on the 6th of August we'll be arriving in Land's End, right down south. Like I say, 14 days.
You're running downhill then?
We're running downhill, but it's a hillier route, apparently. It's around...
It's one of those stupid things that you do feel like Scotland,
mentally,
it feels like it's down.
Mentally, it feels like it's downhill, but apparently the total elevation is higher going from north to south. Figure that one out. So it's meant to be the harder route, but I didn't know any of that. It doesn't matter. It's not easy.
It's basically going to be absolutely broken.
You're plucking at straws.
Yeah.
And we are going to be aiming, the average distance each day is 92.5 kilometers. So we're going to start with 4 back-to-back days at 100, 4 back-to-back days at 95, and then we're going to gradually get lower. That is like, if everything goes to plan, I will be utterly shocked. Like, utterly shocked. I am preparing to walk through nights. I am preparing to have days where I feel like it might end up being like a damage limitation days where I have to force myself to do 50k, and then we have to start changing where we might sleep, and we might have to, there's going to be so many things that are going to change.
Many idiots like me that have said, oh yeah, I'll come and do a day with you.
A few, yeah. Not many people who said they'll do a day.
I'll try.
Understandably,
I've got a good training event for you.
Oh, go on.
8th of July. It's not too close, is it?
How far is it?
Snowdon 24. So you run up Snowdon as many times as you can in 24 hours.
Yeah, that would be too much.
That's why I've just recently signed up.
That'll be great.
To focus it. I've got. I don't want anything. This sounds a bit silly, doesn't it? I don't want anything too crazy. That sounds crazy.
It sounds crazy, but it's also as well.
Drive some training for me.
It's also as well. It's not a certain amount you have to do. When you've got a 24-hour window, it's something where you can chip away at it at your own.
Everesting it is doing it 10 times, which is ridiculously fast to do that in 10 times. 7 times the Kilimanjaro, which I think is what I would be quite happy with.
Yeah, that'd be cool. That'd be fun. Well, that'll be way too close for me for the event. But there's going to be a lot. It's going to be an adventure.
For sure.
It's going to be documented, so...
Get the sponsors on board.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Out.
Anyone who wants to get involved would be fantastic. I'm obviously raising money for the Reorg charity as well, which is great. And yeah, like right now, it's hard because you see how definitively I can speak about all of my experience to this moment.
Yeah.
But with this one, you're catching this conversation at quite a beautiful time, because it's like, I don't have much. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's so
That's
much.
the unknown.
There's still so much uncertainty, and if I could give the audience anything at the end of this podcast, it would be the fact that the way that I feel exactly at this moment about what I've got to come, I felt exactly the same about my first 250, and I felt exactly the same about my 50 2 years ago. And it just shows that evolution of mind and physical capabilities, what you can unlock. Those entry levels just change. And it was at the time that I looked at the 50, a marathon was terrifying. Now that I'm staring down the barrel of this, a marathon feels like an easy training run. And it's not through being cocky or trying to be really fast. It's just mentally you shift from one place to the other, and people can have that from having never done any swimming before, and then suddenly they go and do a triathlon 2 years later, and they're like, but 2 years ago I couldn't even link anything.
And you do, and you remember
and it's
that.
All of that process, that what we want naturally is an upward curve, right? There's always going to be ripples, but we always want a natural upward curve, whether we like to admit it or not. And it doesn't matter in what aspect of our life, but for me, that feeling of physical and mental capabilities, if I focus on that area and it's an upward curve constantly, it spreads out into all the other areas of my life that I need to benefit most. And it just makes me feel...
the positive influence you're having on other people that are watching the journey and seeing that as you go. As you say, you had a lot of messages, and
it's been wonderful.
I was one of those people.
Yeah, and it's
cool.
And it feels great. It feels great to be doing something that you're just passionate about, and it might not make sense to people, but they get it. Do you know what I mean? As much as it doesn't make sense, and it's like, I'm never going to fucking do that.
Yeah.
But I'm like, but you might go and lace up and go for a 20-minute run. Or
or just something,
you
whatever
might
it is.
go and reconnect with that family member you haven't spoken to for 10 years because you're seeing that this guy's turning around and just getting after it. You know, there's something for everyone in challenge and commitment and discipline and consistency, whatever you want to call it. And some other person's, you know, my joggle could be another person's going and walking in the gym that they've been hesitating on for 10 years. And
I
for
think
me,
that's a key takeaway for people, to be like, don't listen to the tool you're using is running and ultra running. Don't hone in too much on that. Try to like zoom out when you're listening to be like, okay, what's my
what's your Everest? You know, what's your version of what
of
I'm
that,
doing? Like it.
And that's only specific to the person, and that's where I think 100%. It can be so. But that's where it becomes so powerful. Where can people follow the journey?
So
towards
predominantly,
is Instagram the best place?
Instagram's the best place. I put a lot more of my own personal stuff on my personal Instagram, which is at Leon Busty. You'll obviously be able to find me on the Lean Machines official as well. There will be some stuff going on YouTube, but realistically, a lot of the event is when you will start to see the grand amount of content of what's going on. I share a lot of stories about my training and bits and pieces, and but on the actual event there will be a roundup every single day, video every day, and then there will be the documentary that will be available afterwards.
So get following on Insta. We'll put the links in the show notes below. So get following Leon on Instagram, and if you're following on Instagram, then you're going to see how to follow along when the event
you'll see everything that you need.
If you want to come and try and run a 1 kilometre,
well, this is the thing, is like some people are coming and running 10, and some people
bring you a croissant. What's your favourite treat? There's a good shout. What's your favourite treat?
Jam sandwich. Really,
is that it? Jam sandwich?
Salty butter and a ton of jam on a bit of sourdough. Is like,
try and bring you
that's
sourdough, some high quality
good quality piece of bread. And also as well, it sounds really random.
Oh no, you said Snickers.
And I love
a Snickers in there, in the sandwich?
We'll melt it in. It's got a really messed up, like a diabetic s'more. It'd be great. But yeah, like you can
what I love most about the event, like a long event, is like it's an eating competition basically.
It's an eating competition on the move, isn't it? And well, I'm gonna have to eat a lot of calories, but we'll see. I'll just be chugging down olive oil come day 3. Be great.
Awesome, mate. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet and do it in the person.
Look at this. It's been a pleasure. It's been fun. Thank you.